For 30 years, one man ruled America's nights. His voice was the last thing millions heard before drifting off to sleep, his laughter the soundtrack of an entire generation. Johnny Carson wasn't just a talk show host, he was a cultural force. He shaped the rhythm of American evenings, turning television into a ritual, a unifying experience across living rooms from coast to coast. With impeccable timing, effortless charm, and razor-sharp wit, he could turn silence into thunderous applause, and a single glance into a moment of comedy gold. But what most never saw was the world behind that glowing desk. A world of tension, of feuds, of buried moments so unsettling that NBC executives locked them away, erasing them from history. To his audience, Carson was a magician of laughter, yet even magicians have tricks they hope no one ever discovers. And when the curtain was pulled back, even for a second, the results were shocking. This is not just the story of a beloved entertainer. This is the story of a man whose influence was vast, but whose secrets reveal how fragile fame truly is. From awkward interviews that spiraled out of control, to scandals that tested his legendary composure, to personal heartbreaks that scarred his private life, Johnny Carson's journey is one of brilliance shadowed by darkness. Tonight, we dive into those shadows. The 14 moments that producers hoped you would forget. The stories that shook the Tonight Show, that challenged the myth of America's late-night king. Because behind every icon lies a truth. And sometimes, the truth is far more powerful than the legend. Before he became the king of late night, Johnny Carson was just a boy in the heartland of America, dreaming of escape. Born on October 23, 1925, in Corning, Iowa, his childhood was shaped by restless moves and modest beginnings. His father, a power company manager, kept the lights on. His mother, sharp and often distant, demanded perfection. But it was in Norfolk. His first wife, Jody Walcott, married him when he was still a dreamer, not yet a star. They raised 3 sons together, but as Johnny's fame ignited, their union burned out. Success came at a cost, nights filled with silence, fights drowned in alcohol, and a marriage that collapsed just as he took the Tonight Show throne in 1962. Decades later, tragedy struck when their son Richard was killed in a car crash, a wound Carson rarely spoke of but never truly healed from. Marriage number 2 was to Joanne Copeland, a model who believed she could steady the storm. For a time, she pushed him to embrace his role as host, but Carson's emotional distance built walls no one could climb. She called him remote. Friends called him icy. By 1972, the marriage was gone, another casualty of his perfectionism. That same year, he wed Joanna Holland. But even with glamour on his arm, Carson was consumed by work. The Tonight Show devoured his hours, leaving little room for family or warmth. By 1985, they too unraveled. His 4th and final wife, Alexis Moss, entered his life in 1987. With her, the fire dimmed into quiet companionship. Retirement brought him peace at last, sailing, reading, slipping into the background of Malibu sunsets. Carson once admitted, "If I had given as much to marriage as I gave to the Tonight Show, I'd probably have a hell of a marriage." It was honesty wrapped in regret, proof that the man who gave laughter to millions could never quite find it at home. Television history is filled with rumors, but few are as haunting as the night Johnny Carson lost control. There was one Tonight Show episode so volatile, so disturbing, that NBC erased it from existence. No reruns. No transcripts. No surviving footage. Officially, it never happened. Yet whispers of that forbidden night have survived for decades. Some say it was a guest who self-destructed on air, a drunken tirade, a racist outburst, a celebrity breakdown so shocking it left Carson paralyzed in his chair. Others believe it wasn't the guest at all, but Carson himself, unraveling in front of millions, shaken by private demons spilling into the spotlight. Whatever it wasn't bloopers or harmless chaos. It was darker. It was dangerous. NBC executives panicked. In an era when image was everything, the thought of America's trusted night host cracking open his perfect veneer was unthinkable. Within hours, the tapes were locked away, some say destroyed, others claim buried deep in vaults. The silence from Carson, the producers, and the network only fueled the fire. Why erase it completely? Why not edit and sanitize it, as they did with other awkward segments? The answer lies in the mystery itself. Whatever happened that night wasn't just embarrassing, it was catastrophic. Something that could damage not only Carson's empire but NBC's reputation forever. And so, the lost episode lives on only in legend, a phantom shadow lurking behind Carson's otherwise pristine career. Scholars, journalists, and fans have searched for evidence, piecing together half-truths and theories, but no concrete answers ever surfaced. Perhaps that's why it chills us still. Because if a man who ruled television for 3 decades had a night so uncontainable it had to be erased from history, then maybe even kings can fall. It began as one of television's most beautiful partnerships, Johnny Carson and Joan Rivers. She was sharp, witty, fearless. He was the gatekeeper of late night, the kingmaker who could launch or bury a career with a single laugh. In 1965, Carson looked her in the eye on national television and said, "You're going to be a star." And she was. For decades, she became his most trusted substitute, filling the chair whenever he was away. To millions, she was his protégé, his chosen heir. But in 1986, the unthinkable happened. Fox, a bold new network hungry for relevance, offered Joan Rivers her own late-night talk show, history's first hosted by a woman. It was groundbreaking, revolutionary. But there was one fatal flaw: she didn't tell Carson until the deal was done. Out of fear, she kept him in the dark, hoping he'd understand once the news broke. He didn't. When she called him, he didn't debate, didn't question, didn't argue. He simply hung up the phone. And that was it. Johnny Carson, a man known for his grudges, never spoke to Joan Rivers again. Not once. She was banned from The Tonight Show for life. Even casual encounters in public were met with cold silence. The entertainment world was stunned. Rivers had broken through a glass ceiling, but she had also crossed a man who did not forgive. The fallout was brutal, not just professional, but deeply personal. To Carson, it wasn't about competition. It was betrayal. To Rivers, it was heartbreak. She would later say losing Carson felt like losing a father. She never appeared on The Tonight Show again until 2014, long after Carson's death. Their silence stretched nearly 3 decades. Proof that in Carson's kingdom, loyalty was everything, and betrayal was exile. For years, Johnny Carson's monologues were harmless jabs, light punches wrapped in charm. But for Wayne Newton, the velvet-voiced singer known as Mr. Las Vegas, those jokes cut like knives. Night after night in the 1970s, Carson teased Newton's masculinity, hinting at rumors, painting him as effeminate, even mocking whispers of his private life. At first, Newton laughed it off, telling himself it was just part of the game. But the ridicule never stopped. And when Carson mocked you, the entire industry followed. The joke spread like wildfire. Soon, Newton wasn't just a singer, he was a punchline. For a year and a half, Newton endured the humiliation. He tried to reason with producers. He tried to appeal to Carson privately. Nothing changed. Until one day, Wayne Newton snapped. He stormed into NBC's Burbank offices, tracked down Carson mid-meeting with producer Fred DeCordova, and demanded a word alone. What followed became a Hollywood legend. Newton stood face-to-face with the king of late night and growled, "Cut out all these jokes about me, or I'll kick your ass." For once, Carson didn't have a comeback. The man who could disarm presidents with wit sat silent, staring at a singer who was dead serious. Newton walked out, leaving a room heavy with tension. Carson never had him on the show again. Years later, Newton described Carson as a mean-spirited human being. He blamed Johnny not only for the humiliation but for fueling damaging rumors about mob ties that haunted his career. Lawsuits followed, reputations were scarred, and the feud was never healed. In the end, Wayne Newton didn't just challenge Johnny Carson's jokes, he challenged his power. And for that, he paid the price. September 5, 1990. The Tonight Show stage glowed as usual, but what unfolded that night wasn't comedy, it was confrontation. Charles Grodin, the actor and satirist with a taste for deadpan provocation, sat across from Johnny Carson. The audience expected playful banter. Instead, they witnessed a duel. Grodin leaned in and asked the unthinkable, "Do you even care about your guests?" No wink. No smile. No safety net of humor. It was a challenge, sharp as a blade, cutting through the glossy surface of late-night ritual. The room froze. For a man who had spent decades mastering the art of control, Carson was rattled. His reply was cold, staccato, defensive. The audience shifted uneasily, caught between laughter and silence. Grodin didn't back down. He pressed harder, exposing the cracks in a host who always seemed untouchable. The segment spiraled into something raw and uncomfortable. This wasn't an interview anymore, it was a reckoning. The polished Tonight Show, a temple of American entertainment, suddenly felt fragile. Carson's smile slipped. His composure faltered. And for once, the king of late night looked vulnerable. Behind the scenes, producers panicked. Should they cut the segment from reruns? Would this rupture the Tonight Show's carefully protected image? In the end, Carson made a surprising decision: leave it in. He let America see him squirm. To this day, the Grodin interview remains one of the strangest artifacts in late-night history. Part performance art, part genuine hostility, it blurred the line between act and reality. For a brief moment, Johnny Carson's power wasn't in command. He wasn't the master conductor of laughter. He was a man on his own stage, challenged, cornered, and exposed. And sometimes, exposure is more unforgettable than charm. It was 1975, and The Tonight Show was supposed to be just another night of Hollywood charm. Johnny Carson sat center stage, calm and composed, but across from him, two storms were colliding. On one side, Shelley Winters, fiery, uncompromising, a woman who never bowed to anyone. On the other, Oliver Reed, the notorious British actor, infamous for his drunken bravado and unchecked misogyny. At first, it was banter, the usual late-night sparring. But Reed, emboldened by the spotlight, turned ugly. He mocked women, reduced their worth to their looks, and hurled sexist jabs with a smirk. The audience laughed nervously, but Winters' eyes blazed. This wasn't a comedy. This was an attack. Halfway through, she made her move. Without hesitation, Winters lifted her glass, aimed squarely at Reed, and hurled the drink into his face. Liquid splashed across him, silencing the room. Gasps echoed through the studio. Carson, usually the master of defusing chaos, looked visibly shaken. For once, he had no punchline, no escape route. In that instant, Shelley Winters did more than defend herself, she shattered the illusion of the Tonight Show's safe, polished world. This wasn't scripted. It wasn't entertainment. It was raw defiance, live on air. Producers scrambled afterward, terrified of the fallout. They cut the segment from reruns, trimming away the confrontation to preserve the Tonight Show's reputation. But the moment couldn't be erased. The original broadcast lived on, whispered about, replayed in bootlegs, immortalized as one of television's most shocking live clashes. Winters didn't just throw a drink. She threw a gauntlet. She refused to be humiliated, and in doing so, exposed late night for what it really was, a stage where power, ego, and gender collided under hot lights. And in that moment, Shelley Winters won. For years, Johnny Carson had a running tradition, the animal segments. They were meant to be light-hearted, moments of wonder and laughter, as zookeepers and animal experts paraded exotic creatures across the stage. But on one unforgettable night in the 1970s, The Tonight Show spiraled into chaos, and Johnny Carson was no longer the cool, collected king of late night. Joan Embery, the beloved animal expert, arrived with her usual lineup of wild companions. But from the start, the animals weren't cooperating. A monkey lunged at a guest's hand, gripping with a force that startled everyone. Nervous laughter rippled through the studio, but Carson's smile faltered. Then came the snake. As handlers tried to keep control, the reptile slithered free, gliding across the stage under the hot lights. The audience gasped. Cameras swung wildly to follow the escape. And Carson, a man who could banter with presidents and silence hecklers with wit, was visibly terrified. He froze, his body stiff, backing away as if the floor itself had turned dangerous. The king of late night was, for once, completely out of his depth. The handler scrambled, chasing the animal as Carson tried to steady his shaking hands. The laughter in the audience was uneasy, part amusement, part shock at seeing Johnny Carson exposed in such a raw, human moment. For a man who built a career on control, it was a rare crack in the armor. NBC producers quietly edited the segment for reruns, cutting out the most frantic moments. But the memory of Carson's fear lived on. For fans, it became legendary, the night when animals ruled the Tonight Show and the mighty Johnny Carson looked small, vulnerable, and human. Because even legends can be undone by chaos. It is perhaps the most infamous Tonight Show story of them all, a tale whispered for decades, retold at bars, in comedy clubs, and across late-night lore. The story goes like this: Zsa Zsa Gabor, the glamorous Hungarian actress, appeared on Carson's show holding her pet cat. At some point, she supposedly turned to Johnny and asked in her sultry voice, "Would you like to pet my pussy?" Without missing a beat, Carson fired back, "Sure, just move the damn cat." It's the perfect joke, risque, quick, and timeless. The kind of line only Johnny Carson could deliver. But here's the twist, there's no proof it ever happened. No footage. No transcript. No official record. For years, fans have scoured the archives, searching for this legendary exchange. They've found nothing. And yet, the legend persists. Some insist they saw it with their own eyes. Others swear it was cut from reruns, buried by NBC. Over time, the myth grew, twisting itself into the collective memory. Some even claim it wasn't Gabor at all, maybe it was Raquel Welch, maybe Jane Fonda. The line changed with each retelling, morphing into what scholars now call a Mandela effect moment, a memory that feels real, but may never have existed. Why does this joke endure? Perhaps because it embodies the Carson legacy, sharp, cheeky, just a little dangerous. The kind of humor that walked the tightrope between safe and scandalous. Whether it truly happened or not almost doesn't matter anymore. Because in the minds of millions, it did. The Zsa